Allen Lund Company looks forward to seeing you at Matt's in March.
OOIDA, representing America's truckers since 1973, presents Landline Now with your host, Mark Redding.
Intersections used to be predictable. Two roads cross, and there's stop signs or a stoplight. Well, the future is here, and intersections are starting to look different. One of the styles being used in some states is called an R-cut, and the results from one intersection in Kentucky indicate it can significantly improve safety. I'll talk with Kyle Pote of the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet. Also on today's program, changes are happening fast in Washington, D.C. these days, but which of those changes might affect your life as a truck driver? And how can you help ensure that those changes happen in a positive way? The best way to do that is to contact your lawmakers and the regulatory agencies that affect the trucking industry. I'll get some advice on that front from Bryce Mungen of OOIDA's Washington, D.C. office. But first, the news with Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Mark. Our top story today. The trucking industry lost significantly more truck drivers in the past 2 years than previously thought. Each year, the Bureau of Labor Statistics revises the past 5 years of employment data in its January report. According to revised numbers, nearly 70,000 trucking jobs were eliminated from the economy in 2023 and 2024, up from the 41,000 jobs initially reported. In 2021 and 2022, a flood of truck drivers entered the market to take advantage of high rates in the wake of the pandemic. After trucking jobs peaked in July of 2022, the industry has been purging itself of excess drivers. Last month, however, nearly 4,000 trucking jobs were added to the economy. David Spencer, Vice President of Market Intelligence at Arrive Logistics, told Landline that the end of 2024 was volatile. He said port strikes, tariff threats, and widespread winter weather events combined with peak retail season may have created more trucking jobs than typical in the fourth quarter. Spencer suggested that truckers may be able to rely on historical seasonal freight changes in 2025. Daimler is recalling several hundred Freightliner trucks over safety concerns. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, in a notice, said the electric vehicle power distribution module may not be assembled properly in affected trucks. The problem can result in a loss of drive power. More than 800 trucks fall under the recall. Certain 2020 through 2025 Freightliner E-Cascadia models are affected, along with some 2022 through 2026 Freightliner EM2 trucks. A fix for the problem is still in the works. Owner notification letters go out at the end of March. 2 states have extended emergency orders, and another has put one in place following separate disasters. In California, the wildfire emergency has been extended there through March 10th. Relief from maximum driving time regulations has been granted for commercial motor vehicles, providing direct assistance. In Iowa, a harvest emergency has once again been extended through March 8th. Overweight restrictions for loads of soybeans, corn, hay, fertilizer, and more are suspended. Permit requirements have also been relaxed. The order applies to loads transported on all Iowa highways, but not the interstate system. And in New York, an extended period of severe winter conditions has prompted an emergency declaration through February 22nd. Relaxed hours of service regulations are in effect for carriers transporting rock salt in the state. Cargo thieves are apparently trying out a new technique. Overhaul says in a new report that the crooks are entering trailers at brief stops like traffic signals and stealing items while the vehicle is in motion. After getting what they want, usually electronics, the thieves exit the trailer when it comes to another stop, hop into a nearby vehicle that's being driven by an accomplice, and leave the scene. Overhaul said in some instances, if opportunities to exit the trailer are limited, the thieves in the nearby vehicle will pull in front of the tractor and slow down or stop to allow the suspects to exit the trailer. According to Overhaul, the method has been seen on both the East and West Coasts. Some tips if you suspect you're being followed. Overhaul suggests slowing down to 15 miles an hour below the speed limit for 10 minutes. If a vehicle is still following you at that time, exit and then immediately re-enter the highway. If the tail persists, contact dispatch or your remote monitoring center before stopping in a well-lit and populated area to call police. An increase in cargo theft activity has been noted over the past few years. According to a report from New Jersey-based logistics security firm CargoNet, the total number of reported theft incidents climbed 27% in 2024 compared with the previous year. If Arizona's on your route, watch your 6. 1 year after the Cochise County Sheriff's Office warned the public about a string of robberies at rest stops, they're out with yet another. Deputies say they've been getting reports of suspicious activity at the rest stop off Interstate 10 near San Simon. That's the same location multiple suspects who stole money from truckers a year ago got away. The sheriff's office is investigating. They're also warning truck drivers and the public to take precautions and have situational awareness. A former trucking company owner has been accused of participating in a conspiracy to overcharge Williams-Sonoma and others by more than $4 million. Jose Pena of New Jersey was charged in federal court last week with one count of conspiracy to commit wire fraud. According to court documents, Pena owned and operated a trucking business that subcontracted with a logistics company to provide deliveries for the home goods company Williams-Sonoma. Prosecutors allege that Pena conspired for more than 2 years with employees of Williams-Sonoma and the logistics company, charging more than $3.6 million for thousands of fabricated deliveries and services. In exchange for their help, the U.S. Attorney's Office says Pena gave his co-conspirators lavish kickbacks, including cash, checks, an SUV, and a Rolex. 2 of Pena's alleged co-conspirators have already pleaded guilty in connection to the scheme. Each faces up to 20 years in prison. An investigation is underway in Indiana after a truck driver was killed in a tragic accident. Police in Goshen, Indiana, told the South Bend Tribune that 36-year-old Milos Jovanovic was killed last week when he was crushed by a 2.5-ton load of steel tubing. Jovanovic, working for a trucking company out of Chicago, had just delivered the load. A bridge known in Ohio as the Big Mac is back open 3 months after fire damage closed it down. The southbound lanes of the I-471 bridge, which connects Ohio and Kentucky, reopened late Sunday night. 4 people have been charged in connection with the fire, which started in a playground underneath the bridge in November. A rest area off Interstate 70 in eastern Colorado is closing for the next few months. Renovations at the Araba Rest Area at mile marker 383 are scheduled to take about 4 months to complete. The location is set to reopen in June. The Colorado DOT says drivers should use nearby rest areas in Burlington, Stratton, and Lyman until then. And finally, the Memphis Zoo has a special offer this Valentine's Day, and it's not just for those who celebrate the day. Sure, you can send a video of a red panda eating a grape to your sweetheart, but how about something else for your ex, maybe? If that's more your speed, the Memphis Zoo is also offering a video of an elephant going number 2. They'll even name it for you. The zoo wrote, quote, "This Valentine's let an elephant do the talking and name a turd after a turd," end quote. The promotion is called Dating or Dumping. The digital cards available for purchase through Wednesday cost $10. All proceeds go toward taking care of the zoo's animals. That's Landline Now News for today. I'm Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Scott. OOIDA is seeking the names and addresses of military personnel who are serving overseas so we can send them care packages through the Truckers for Troops program. You can call that information in to Nikki Johnson at our main number, 816-229-5791, or email it to troops@ooida.com. Again, that's Nikki Johnson at our main number, 816-229-5791, or email troops@ooida.com. Starting Tuesday, Marty Ellis and OOIDA's tour truck, The Spirit of the American Trucker, will be at the Petro in El Paso, Texas. That's located at exit 37 on Interstate 10. Stop in, say hi to Marty, and join OOIDA for a $10 discount. Got a news tip? Email it to us at landlinenow@ooida.com. Again, that email address is landlinenow@ooida.com. Next, I'll discuss an unusual type of intersection in Kentucky and how it's improved safety with Kyle Pote of the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet. And we'll hear how you can keep in touch with lawmakers on important trucking issues from Bryce Mungen of OOIDA. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Capital Reman, the leader in remanufactured diesel engines and components, has partnered with OOIDA to offer exclusive member benefits. Visit capitalreman.com today to support America's transportation industry and take advantage of your benefits.
Running on ultra-low sulfur diesel? Stay protected this winter with Howe's Diesel Treat and Diesel Lifeline. Steer clear of gel and ice with North America's #1 trusted brand. Find Howe's products nationwide at select retailers, auto parts stores, truck stops, and on Amazon.com.
It's tested and proven. Burn 2.1% less fuel when you balance all wheel ends with Centromatic. Call 800-523-8473 to get the OOIDA discount.
It used to be that intersections were typical and predictable. Two roads cross, and there's stop signs or a stop light. Well, the future is here, and intersections are starting to look significantly different. You're listening to Landline Now, and I'm your host, Mark Reddick. Welcome back to the program. Perhaps the earliest and best-known alternative form of intersection is the roundabout. The circular road intersections are commonplace in some other countries. In England, they're everywhere. But in the U.S., such intersections are a fairly new experience for most motorists. But the use of roundabouts is expanding. In fact, Carmel, Indiana, a town of about 100,000 people, claims to have 150 roundabouts in its road network. Now, another alternative form of intersection is starting to appear. In Kentucky, they call it an R-cut, or restricted crossing U-turn. I spoke recently with Kyle Pote, who is the Chief District Engineer for the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet's District 1, where new figures regarding an R-cut intersection installed a few years ago is showing some impressive results. Kentucky has installed a different kind of intersection than typical in Trigg County. This is where US 68 meets State Highway 139. And first of all, I want to start, for folks who aren't from Kentucky or aren't familiar with the state, can you describe where in Kentucky that is?
Sure. Yeah, so Trigg County, Katie's area, is in southwest Kentucky. It's just east of the Land Between the Lakes area. It exists just west of the I-24 corridor coming out of Tennessee. So you're basically in the Fort Campbell, Clarksville, Tennessee, just north of that, northwest of that.
Okay. Now, this new type of intersection is called an R-cut, R-C-U-T. Can you describe what that looks like for someone traveling down the road?
Yeah, sure. So the R-cut is really kind of a term that we here at the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet call it. Other states call it J-turn, Michigan left. There's several different acronyms. So the R-cut for us stands for restricted crossing U-turn. And so what you're doing with that style of an intersection is you are preventing the minor street, so the connecting street on the sides of a main thoroughfare, from being able to make that straight across movement and or a movement from the minor street left turn out onto the major movement. You allow the major movement to have free flow. You also allow the major movement to be able to make left turns onto that minor street on either side. So the minor street, in order to make a left, has to execute a right only off of the minor street onto the major road. They immediately will get over into a left-hand turn lane that will extend approximately 700 feet and then make a U-turn onto the major street to go back in the direction they're trying to come from.
Now, I've seen some of these before, actually, and the ones I've seen, after you make that left turn to do a U-turn, sometimes they'll have like an extension of the pavement on that other lane with kind of a circular area for larger vehicles.
Correct.
Are the R-cuts there in Kentucky kind of like that?
We have some of both. So that's called a bulb out. And the purpose of that is exactly what you just said. So when you have larger vehicles, for example, semis, if you do not have an adequate width median that is allowing enough gap between, say, an eastbound and a westbound direction on that 4-lane highway, then that larger vehicle cannot execute that U-turn without having to veer over into the shoulder. So we create that bulb out to give them that extra turning radius. Now, on some of our roads, you actually have wider medians, ones that almost mimic an interstate footprint. So you have about a 60-foot wide median. That gap allows that semi to be able to execute that turn and never have to have that bulb out to create its arc.
Okay. Now, this may seem obvious to folks, but can you explain what the advantages are of an R-cut versus a typical intersection where some minor road meets a highway?
Yeah. So what we have found And that's the same data that a lot of other states have accumulated through the years. So Kentucky is kind of newer to the game of instituting what we've called the R cuts. Other states have had them in operation longer than us. The overall concept of it is that you take an intersection that has had a history of higher collisions, a lot of those due to that crossover movement of that minor street. And so in a typical four-way configuration, so to speak, you have about 32 conflict points, and several of those 32 conflict points result in the potential for serious collisions, T-bones, high-speed T-bones, direct hits. And so whenever you limit that ability for the crossover traffic, which is going to be executing that movement at a lower speed versus the main line, and put them on a right turn, you reduce those conflict points by half. So you take 32 down to 16, and of those 16 conflict points that you have remaining, they're more of glancing type collisions. So it greatly reduces the severity of the collision. It also just reduces the overall number of ways that a collision could occur. And so, for example, this one in Trigg County that you're referencing, we had seen a lot of collisions at that location, had actually had a lot of the local officials and public there in Trigg County that had started reaching out to us, wanting us to put a signalized intersection there. And so the two things that would have occurred with the signalized intersection, number one would have been is that a lot of times the signal isn't the best answer, because there again, you're enhancing those abilities for those serious collision points. For example, somebody runs the red light on the main line, somebody on the side street doesn't really wait long enough to see if this car is going to stop at the red light. They see they have a green, they just proceed on, and then there's a high-speed T-bone accident. The other problem that you have, for example, in this particular location with putting a signal, is this particular section of Highway 6880 there in Trigg County has actually been built over the last 20 years as essentially a bypass around town. And so if we start going to all of these intersections along that corridor and adding signals, then now we've just recreated the problem that existed in town with a bunch of stop and go conditions, and then people would have been asking for another bypass. And so the whole thought process is number one, we want to create a safe intersection and not create something that's going to enhance the potential for dangerous collisions. And then secondly, we don't want to mitigate the fact that we're trying to create a free flow movement for traffic.
You know, I was looking at a local news report about this, and they had some statistics in there regarding that intersection and basically how well the R-Cut has done in terms of safety since it was installed. Can you kind of describe what kind of actual safety improvements you saw on the ground?
Yeah. So at that particular location, we had a couple of fatalities preceding implementation of the R-Cut there. Very high crash history at that location overall. Since implementation of that particular intersection, in the last 5 years, our data has shown that overall collisions are down nearly 65%. Serious injury collisions are down over 70%, and we've had no fatalities. And so whenever you look at that data, even in conjunction with data across the nation at all other R-Cuts or whatever you want to call them, the historical data shows that they bring all collisions down by roughly 50%. So we're already at a higher trajectory than you're seeing as the national average, which is even better news.
Are there other intersections like this in Kentucky?
There are. I don't have the exact number. We here in District 1, which we serve the 12 westernmost counties in Kentucky, this was our first one that we actually put live, so to speak. We now have at least 12 that I can recall now fully functional, with about 10 more to go in the next 3 or 4 years. There's, again, several other ones across the state. It is one of the tools in the toolbox, along with something like roundabouts, that as we start to design new roads or improve new roads, and or we identify high collision areas, that we immediately go to the toolbox and say, I think this is probably what we need to implement here because the data shows that it works.
Now, you mentioned roundabouts there, which, you know, our audience is made up of truck drivers. They're not fond of them. As you can imagine, some of them are small enough, it's almost impossible to get a semi through. But I have seen officials explain basically why it is they like them. And I hear things like, for one thing, if the power goes out, a stoplight is just non-functional, but the roundabout's just there. and they also don't have to maintain that stoplight. Is that the case with the R-cuts too? I mean, is that some of the consideration there?
Definitely, yes. I mean, as I had pointed out with this one in Trigg County, for example, the folks there had hoped that we were going to put a signal in before we came to them with the R-cut idea. So to your point, that would have been another location where we would have had to have had power ran there in the first place to operate the signal. And then secondly, as you pointed, during moments where there was a power outage, we would have to sacrifice the ability of that intersection being signalized and being converted back to hopefully everybody obeying the old four-way stop idea. So most doubtedly, it helps with that. The other thing too with the roundabouts, which is similar to the R-cuts, is the roundabout is also reducing those conflict points, as I'd pointed out, where you have a very low speed movement around that circular intersection. So you have glancing blows whenever they do occur. You also throttle down, so to speak, traffic flow anyhow, because they cannot execute it in a faster speed.
I'm wondering, in reference to the R-cut here, you mentioned that there are other locations in the state, and I have seen them in other states as well. Is this something that Kentucky is considering moving more toward expanding beyond those that already exist?
Yes, we have taken a very strong approach to designing and implementing what we call safer intersections. And so the R-cuts and the roundabouts are definitely very high up on our radar of looking for locations that we know that these would improve the dynamics of areas that we're seeing negative results from a collision standpoint.
What sort of factors will the state consider? I mean, you mentioned accident reduction. That's obviously a big one. But when you're looking at these future intersections, are there other factors the state considers when deciding where to put these in the future?
Yeah. So, for example, we are in the process of building a new US 641 corridor here in District 1, which runs from Murray, Kentucky, south to Tennessee. There's an existing US 641 corridor that's a 2-lane highway. The traffic volumes on it have been increasing over the years. It leads up towards Murray State University here in Western Kentucky. And it has a fair amount of high truck traffic volumes. And so we have been building a 4-lane corridor there to replace that 2-lane corridor. One of the things that we looked at as we were building out that 4-lane corridor is we went ahead on the front end and identified some of the cross streets that we knew already had a major traffic volume that now would be intersecting this 4-lane highway, and or side streets that we felt like could have a increase in traffic volume due to us creating this 4-lane highway. And so we built those out with R-cuts during the initial design and layout. So as soon as we opened the road, it had the R-cuts already implemented. So not just existing data at locations that are already there that show a high collision rate, we're also trying to identify on the front end ones that we know are going to have a high traffic volume of minor and major street and fix them before we ever start.
A kind of preemptive strike.
Very much.
Okay. When the state first considered using these, way back when, did it look at other states that were using them? I know states do that a lot. And if that's the case, what did Kentucky learn from those states that they didn't know before?
We had reached out to several surrounding states, Missouri being one of them. We actually borrowed some videos from Missouri of people utilizing R-cuts. We had public meetings with some of the ones that we first implemented here in Western Kentucky, used those very same videos from MoDOT. We had reached out to Michigan, North Carolina. All of those states really kind of gave us what we've now springboarded with as well, is that, hey, we have found that as we have implemented these at existing intersections, we've seen at least a 50% reduction in the overall collisions and an even higher percentage in the reduction of injury collisions.
I've been talking with Kyle Pote, who is the Chief District Engineer for the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet's District 1, about an R-cut intersection at US 68 and Kentucky Highway 139 in Trigg County, and what it's done to help improve safety there. We'll be back with more of that conversation in a moment. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Are you tired of the IRS following you around like a dark cloud? Call 888-557-4020 and get your life back.
At Truck Stop, we built a better load board for carriers like you. Sign up today and access over 600,000 loads on the most trusted online load board. Learn why the best in the business rely on TruckStop to make more money and start driving your profit today.
Landline Now. Welcome back. Before the break, I was talking with Kyle Pote, who is the Chief District Engineer for the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet's District 1. Our topic is what the state and the Federal Highway Administration call an R-cut intersection at US 68 and Kentucky Highway 139 in Trigg County, a design starting to appear in different parts of the country, and what this one in particular has done to help improve safety there. We now continue that conversation in progress.
It actually free flows traffic better overall versus a signalized intersection because, one of the things that we've heard from the public, especially early on as we implemented these, there were a couple locations, not this one in Trigg, but after this one in Trigg, where we actually took out signals that existed and then recreated the intersection now with an R-cut. And so one of the things that we immediately heard from folks, and this was kind of the same feedback we got from those other states, is that folks, when they first hear that you're going to take out the signalized intersection and now I'm going to make them make a right turn to go up a ways and then make a left and come right back the same direction, the first thing they say is, you're going to make me take longer. And so the other states would tell us the same thing. You're going to hear people say that it's counterintuitive in their mind, and now it's going to take them longer to execute that same movement. And so one of the things that we have found is that on the very unlikely scenario that you are the car that pulls up to that minor street signal and happens to be at the moment that that signal has reached its time limit and is ready to cycle through and come to your side of the intersection to give a green. At that moment, yeah, it's going to be quicker had that been a signalized intersection. But in most all other instances, by the time you pull up there, find a gap, execute a right turn, and immediately go up to make your left and come back to that same point, it's the same amount of time and or shorter than it would have been waiting for that signal to time out.
It just seems longer to them.
It just feels longer. Yeah.
We've talked about the R-cuts, obviously. You've mentioned, and I've mentioned roundabouts a couple of times. There are other unique or new intersection types that DOTs across the country are looking at. And I'm curious if Kentucky is looking at some of those others, and if so, what kinds?
Sure. Yeah. Another one that we have been exploring, we do not have any here in District 1, and I don't know that we have any across the state, is what you would call a continuous green T intersection. So the premise behind that is you take basically a three-legged style intersection. You have a main road and then one side street, and the opposite movement on that main road still has a free flow movement on one of the two lanes, but you have a protected green turn on the minor street that only stops, say, the eastbound traffic, so that you still allow westbound traffic to go. This becomes a merge movement. It reduces the time length that signal has to be read, and it also still reduces the footprint of how many major collisions you can have from a crossing standpoint. Another style of intersection that has really taken hold in a lot of places, we actually here in District 1 were only the second location in Kentucky at the time to have implemented one, is what we call a double crossover diamond. So we have one in Paducah, which is where I'm at here, out at our mall exit along I-24. So the double crossover diamond is a concept where as you come off the off-ramps of an interstate and you're going to hit a major intersecting street that runs underneath that interstate, that you take those movements and you move everybody to the opposite side of the road of what they would normally drive on through a certain corridor. That also allows for taking away the conflicting turns across traffic. So if you see at those intersections that you're going to have a lot of left turn movements back onto the interstate, for example, you get that traffic to the other side so they have an unopposed turn and you're able to flush out traffic. You also are reducing those conflict points.
It's interesting you mentioned that. Missouri refers to them as diverging diamonds.
Yeah.
And we actually have, from where I'm located, one 4 miles to the east, and I think one about 6 miles to the west. And one of the things that I noticed about that is those exits were known before they put in the diverging diamond. Or double crossover diamond. They were known for backing up onto the interstate, especially during rush hour, that there were so many people exiting. when they put those in, there were no backups anymore. It really seemed to actually help people get off the interstate more quickly. And I would think avoiding a backup that comes off the exit ramp and back onto the interstate would be a major safety improvement.
Absolutely. And that's very similar to what we have seen with the one we have here in Paducah. So we opened it up really around the holidays of 2019. So around Thanksgiving, Christmas timeframe. And so just a little tidbit about exit 4 US 60 here in Paducah, where this DCD is that is our mall exit. And so all of the hotels, restaurants, our major mall, Super Walmart, all of those things exist on that corridor. And really that becomes the hub during the holiday season for all the shoppers to go. And so to your point, one of the things that we had seen prior to us implementing that was, especially in those days, the Black Friday holiday, et cetera, is that we would see folks backing up at that signal onto I-24, sometimes, half a mile into that right lane, waiting for that signal to turn, which obviously creates a very hazardous problem upon implementation of the DCD, in which we really had targeted. So I'll hone in on what I said a while ago. We opened it up right prior to the Thanksgiving shopping season there in 2019. And that was intentional because we wanted to be able to get the first revelation of how beneficial it was going to be with that first holiday season. Had no backups. We actually had a lot of folks, believe it or not, as we started building the DCD and during construction, we would have folks calling in. Of course, they had never seen one or they couldn't grasp the concept, and had a lot of calls of, this is going to be terrible. It's not going to work great. It's going to make things worse. Why have y'all done this? And so personally, I would say probably 90% of those calls I got was in that direction. And literally 1 week after we had opened it up, we had the Thanksgiving holiday shopping season kickoff, very limited backups, a lot more free flow traffic. 90% of my calls became, hey, this is the greatest thing y'all have ever done, or what took you so long to do this, or y'all should have done this 10 years ago. It works great. So immediately saw positive results.
Well, and you mentioned people saying, and I think you were referring to the R-Cut, that it's counterintuitive. And certainly within the United States, driving on the left side of the road is definitely counterintuitive. But the one that is to the east of where I'm currently located is where there are two large truck stops. And so you've got, it's a small town, but with those two truck stops, you have a lot of ingoing and outgoing truck traffic. And so it appears to me, at least, just observing it, that it seems to be working very well. Something else we talked about a couple of times were roundabouts. And I think I mentioned earlier that truckers are not terribly fond of them. Some of them on highways, especially smaller state highways around the country, are not big enough for trucks. We have others that basically are made much, much larger, especially in truck-heavy areas. And I'm curious if that's something that Kentucky's taking into consideration with those intersections, and what sort of experience has the state had, especially in relationship to tractor-trailers and that type of intersection?
Yeah. So one of the things that we've been doing, especially here in District 1, so we have, in the next 5 years, we have approximately 12 roundabouts here in my district that we are going to be putting into implementation at various locations. And so one of the things that we've leaned upon, learning lessons learned from others around the state that have implemented roundabouts before us, or even other states, is, as you just pointed out, making sure that you have a design and a footprint that can accommodate larger trucks, especially if you have an intersection that maybe is known for larger trucks. And so one of the things that we've done as we start to look at these 12 plus locations where we're doing them is, if we have a spot that we know the roundabout is going to be the best solution, but maybe it's going to have the negative side of, we don't have enough of a footprint to make as big of a roundabout as we would like to accommodate that truck traffic, that we're creating the mountable style median in the middle to allow that off tracking of that truck, or say a super wide load, for example. We live in other than Paducah, we're a pretty rural area around here. So we have a lot of farm and agriculture equipment too, combines, things like that. So one of the things that we've looked at as well is, by having that mountable median, it's going to allow that wider load combine, whatever it is, to traverse almost straight across as if it were a normal intersection, instead of trying to make that round movement. one of the things I tell my team all the time is that in the eyes of the public, especially when we go out here and try to do something innovative and new and something that they're unfamiliar with, we only really get one shot to win them over or make it right in their mind. And so I really tell my team that I want us to think through every angle before we implement something, reach out to others, find the lessons learned, think through every nuance so that hopefully when we design it and build it, we have figured out every problem we may encounter before we go live with it. Because the last thing we want to do is put it in place. It's in place for 2 or 3 weeks and we're already starting to see problems and getting feedback and we're out there changing things, because then we've lost the confidence of the public.
Yeah, and I've seen situations like that. One example I think of is a trucker I talked with, and he was essentially taking a shortcut to avoid bad weather, and it was a 2-lane state highway. Well, the last time he went through, it was just 2 lanes straight through, and in the intervening time, they had added 4 tiny little roundabouts where it went around a town. And he used very creative language by the end of that drive. That's all I have. Is there anything else that you'd like to add, or anything maybe that I didn't ask you about that I should have?
No, other than, I think I probably speak for all DOTs and transportation officials that whenever folks see that an entity is wanting to incorporate one of these innovative intersections, is give us the benefit of the doubt. Know that our heart and our intentions are always in the safety of the drivers out here. That is what we're trying to do, is create a safer network for people. And so while things may seem counterintuitive, don't throw stones at us, because our mission is to make things better for all of us.
Okay. Kyle, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. You as well.
I've been talking with Kyle Pote, who is the Chief District Engineer for the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet's District 1, about an R-cut intersection at US 68 and Kentucky Highway 139 in Trigg County, and what it's done to help improve safety there. Although technically the idea of an R-cut is not new, it first appeared nearly 40 years ago, it is new to some areas, and the increased use of the design is new as well. In fact, the idea is gaining a foothold in a number of states. For example, in Missouri, State Route 150, running from Lee's Summit to Interstate 49, has a number of R-cut intersections and turnarounds that use the design, including what Pote called bump outs and Missouri calls a J-turn. Another place they're in use is at 3 intersections on Maryland's eastern shore, running along US 301 and 2 on US 15 in Emmitsburg. The Federal Highway Administration cites several intersections along US 23 and 74 in Haywood County, North Carolina, which is located between Gatlinburg and Asheville. The R-cuts along US 23 and 74, like the one in Kentucky, have shown significant improvements to safety. The Federal Highway Administration says the number of total crashes dropped 31%, and fatal or injury crashes went down 41%. A report written by researchers at Florida A&M University in cooperation with Florida State University says this: conventional intersection designs are known to be problematic and unreliable when handling the complexity associated with the heavy traffic volume and travel demand on today's roadways. The R-cut seems to solve those issues at some intersections, primarily in rural areas, for a significant number of jurisdictions. We'll be back in just a moment with more news and information. Please stay with us through a short commercial break. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Since you started, what you've loved about trucking is the freedom. Heading out on your favorite route, a good driving song, and thinking about truck insurance. Well, maybe not that last one. That's why we're here. At OOIDA, we have a full range of truck insurance products, expert advice, and great customer service, helping you get the right coverage for your operation. Go to OOIDA.com, because your job is to drive. Our job is to help with everything else.
Landline Now, welcome back. Changes are happening fast in Washington, D.C. these days, but which of those changes might affect your life as a truck driver, and how can you help ensure that those changes happen in a positive way? The best way to do that is to contact your lawmakers and the regulatory agencies that affect the trucking industry. Here with some advice on that front is Bryce Mungen of OOIDA's Washington, D.C. office. Bryce, how are you doing?
Mark, I'm good. How about yourself?
Very well. I think I want to start with some questions that I hear from folks a lot. And it's kind of the negative side of this. People say, why does it even matter if I contact my lawmakers? They're going to do what they want. What effect does it have when you contact a lawmaker or a lawmaker's office?
Yeah, it really does make a difference. I guess I'll start by saying it is absolutely important. It does make a difference. That's not to say that you're always going to win on every single issue every time or convince your lawmaker that they're going to take your side on every issue. But even if they don't agree with you or, don't come all the way around, you're helping to inform them and you are, making a difference one way or another. The biggest thing is that so many lawmakers and their offices just aren't familiar with our issues or they're not really familiar with the specifics of our issues. So education is really a big part of getting in contact with your lawmakers. And without doing that, and without letting them know that, they have constituents who care about these issues, then it's inviting them to ignore them. So first and foremost, it really is important to get in touch, and it does make a difference.
There's really, in my mind, kind of two aspects to this. One of them is developing a relationship and becoming an information source. And the other one is just informing your lawmaker of where you stand on one particular issue. And I think the one where you develop a relationship is the one that's kind of more interesting to me.
Yeah.
And how do you go about that? I mean, it's one thing to say develop a relationship, but if the other side's not willing, I mean, how do you become one of those people they turn to when they have questions about trucking?
Yeah, I think really what you can do is share your specific expertise on an issue. It doesn't mean you have to, write extended letters to them or call them every week to update them about what's going on. But if when a WIDO is talking about a piece of legislation or an issue and we say, hey, contact your lawmakers, if you pick up the phone, give them a call and say, hey, I'm a small business trucker in your district. Here's what this means to me. Leave your contact information and, don't be afraid to follow up at appropriate times. They can come to see you as a reliable source of information. Again, I think what you can do that's important is you're not presenting this in a political way, but you're presenting this as someone who is an expert on these issues. And as, if you're working with a good office or a good staffer, as time goes on, they can come to view you as a source of trusted information. So you're right. It is kind of easier said than done, but it doesn't need to be, it's not rocket science. It doesn't need to be extensive, but it's just a matter of being consistent, being specific and, not being afraid to share your expertise on issues.
The other half of that, of course, is just calling on a particular issue. And it's kind of interesting. I've talked with some of the folks that worked there in D.C. in previous years. And correct me if I'm wrong, one of the things that I've been told by several of them is that every day the members of Congress get a briefing from their staff. And basically they want to know what are they getting calls about, what issues, and how many calls on either side, and what are people saying? I mean, is that still the case?
Yeah, absolutely. Every office is going to be a little bit different in how they do this, but lawmakers, if they're any good at their job, they want to know what their constituents are talking about. So, it may not be that, your specific exact message is going to get right up to the lawmaker every time, but if you're calling in and saying, hey, support truck parking, and other members and other truckers are doing the same thing, that message is going to get through. And the lawmaker is going to know, hey, this week we've gotten a whole number of calls about this truck parking issue or about this speed limiter issue. But, on a more specific issue, if, we referencing back to what we talked about before, if you developed a relationship and you kind of talk about something, let's say broker transparency, where maybe it's not something they're familiar with, and they get a couple calls about it and you've left specific information about that issue, that can help to inform that staff and that lawmaker about it. So absolutely, it does get to the lawmaker. Again, that's not to say that it's always going to be falling on our side favorably. But if you're developing that relationship and we have a number of truckers, if we have truckers reaching out in large numbers, it's hard for lawmakers to ignore that. So you are making a difference one way or another. You're making their job, in some ways easier because they have more information, but you're also making it hard for them to ignore you. It's a lot harder to oppose you when, they're hearing from truckers in numbers and when they've heard from you before, when you have that relationship. So it is something that they do care about.
One of the things I've also talked with other folks about over the years is the way you contact them. Obviously, we're talking about calling here, but you can also send a letter through the mail. You can also send an email. Is one of those particularly more effective than the other, and why is that?
It really all depends on the issue. I think and I guess I'll also preface it by saying we have fightingfortruckers.com, which is how we send out our advocacy information. So when we have an issue that's hot and we want to inform our members and even non-members, you can go ahead and sign up at fightingfortruckers.com. We send out an email saying, hey, there's this piece of legislation that's been introduced. Send an email to your lawmaker, tell them to support it. So if it is something like truck parking, for example, an email can be effective because if they start to hear about that from truckers in large numbers, it's something they may want to support. But it may be something more specific. Say you've had a more if you're unfortunately had a more specific brush with freight fraud or an issue with broker transparency, something that's a little more nuanced, maybe that's an issue where picking up the phone, giving a call, sharing your information can be helpful because it might not come across as well or as effectively in a written email. So it really does depend. There's no wrong way to do it. If you're engaging with your lawmaker, that's a good way to do it. But fightingfortruckers.com is a great way to stay informed and participate in those call to actions. But, as you kind of get the feel for it and you understand issues more, it may be more appropriate to pick up the phone and share some more details.
We've got a little over a minute left here, Bryce, and I did want to ask one other thing. I think something that does help people is knowing that this has worked in the past. What are some of the issues in the trucking industry where truckers getting in touch with their lawmakers did make a difference?
Yeah, the biggest one that comes to my mind is on speed limiters. There were over 15,000 comments submitted to FMCSA when they put out their rulemaking on speed limiters. And we know the agency has said that they had to look through all those comments and digesting all those comments and working to formulate a response to them. It took a lot of time to do that. And the rulemaking got pushed off. And now that we've seen a change in administrations, we expect that to be pulled back. So there's one first and foremost where the large number of the large amount of outreach from truckers really did make a difference. And the other one I'll briefly mention too is truck parking. I mean, that issue is now part of the conversation on Capitol Hill because truckers have talked so much about that issue with their lawmakers. It's something that lawmakers are familiar with when I could say a few years ago, this is something that was not at the top of the conversation list. So it absolutely does make a difference. Okay.
Well, Bryce, thank you very much for the information, and hopefully we helped someone.
Yeah, I would certainly think we will. Thank you.
I've been talking with Bryce Mungen of OOIDA's Washington, D.C. office. And folks, if you want to make a call to your members of Congress, one in the House, two in the Senate, you just need to remember one phone number, not all the different numbers. And that one number is 202-224-3121. Again, that phone number is 202-224-3121. Or once again, you can find contact information or write a letter through fightingfortruckers.com. That's our program for today. Thank you for joining us. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
I'm a dad.
A son.
A husband.
Wife.
I'm a writer.
Photographer.
I farm.
I'm a veteran.
I love old cars. Fishing.
My kids.
Chrome.
And I am
a professional truck driver.
And together we are OOIDA.
OOIDA was founded by truckers to stand up and speak on behalf of truckers.
We've done that by combining the individual voices of our members into a single, powerful voice. Protecting your interests, defending your rights.
Join us! Make your voice heard. Join OOIDA, the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. Call 1-800-444-5791 or visit ooida.com.